The grandparents, Anita.
Well, first of all, introduce yourself.
Okay. Now, do you want my maiden name?
You can.
Give all your
so.
names.
Okay.
My name is Elaine Schwartzman Radetsky, and I now live in Savannah, Georgia. And I've been here for 53 years, coming from Atlanta, Georgia, where my parents and my sister and I arrived in 1940. I was 5 years old, and my father was a cantor in a chazan in Atlanta at the Ahavat Achim Synagogue, which at that time was Orthodox. I started kindergarten in Atlanta at the James F. Key Elementary School, which is near where the current stadium is now, in the south side of Atlanta, south of the capital. And as I said, I started kindergarten and I made friends right away. Most of them were Jewish. Many of the Jews lived in that part of town at that time in the 1940s, well, before I got there, but especially in 1940. And all of my friends, I'm very friendly with those who are still around from kindergarten. Some of them live in Atlanta, some in Florida, and in different parts of the country. As I said, my father was the chazan, so we kept kosher. We observed, of course, all the Jewish holidays, and we had a good Jewish background. We walked to synagogue every day. We did not own an automobile, not every day, but every Shabbos and every holiday and every function, which was a little over a mile. And there were many Jews, as I said, lived there. There were many Sephardic Jews. I didn't even know the word Sephardic at that time. I did not realize at that time until I probably moved here in 1961 that there was a terrible stigmatism to the Spanish Jews in Atlanta. And it's amazing how I had no knowledge of that. And we were friendly with everybody. And we had non-Jewish friends also. I had, like as I said, I had a good Jewish background. Belonged to the Young Judea. Went to many of the Jewish functions. Belonged to the Girl Scouts.
Radetsky.
I went to Tel Yehuda from young, which was at that time was part of. It was a Young Judea sponsored camp at that time, I believe, and it was a little because our father was the chazan. Of course, I had certain restrictions, and I couldn't go to many of the eating places that my friends went to, and I couldn't ride on Friday night and Saturday, Shabbat, or the holidays. But I overcame that. It was no big deal, and I left there. I graduated high school there, Hoke-Smith High, which is no longer there. It's been torn down. And I left Atlanta to go to the college at the University of Pittsburgh. And I was there for 4 years and graduated, and then started teaching school there. And then had to come home because my mother became very ill. And I had a younger sister that was 13, and my older sister was already married, living here in Savannah. And I continued being part of the Jewish community. I worked for the Jewish Community Center in Atlanta because I couldn't get a job teaching at that time. There was a lot of politics, as usual, going on with the school system. And I finally did get a job teaching. And then my mother passed away, and then I left there. I left Atlanta subsequently, and I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and taught public school there, and was still involved in the Jewish community. And my husband was from here, and he traveled that area, factory rep for ladies' shoes, and we met. And after 3 years of him coming back and forth to Cleveland, that was part of his territory, and me coming here to visit my sister Anita, who was a widow at the time with 2 small children. And then after that, we got married, and I'm here involved in the Jewish community here in Savannah.
I'm going to stop you for just a minute. Your interview is wonderful, and
I know my father came over from Russia as a young man, as a cantor.
As a cantor.
That was his life
So in fact, he had a very Jewish purpose
Exactly.
in the community and didn't have to worry about those kinds of relationships. But
Carol,
did
let me
you
just
have to
stop you
deal
for a
with,
minute.
yes,
Our father and mother both knew, don't put it on me, because they were friends with everybody.
Mhm.
The Sephardic rabbi and his wife were in Atlanta, were the closest of friends with our
Yeah,
mother and
well,
father.
well-
And the same thing with black people. Don't forget, we came from
Let me just-
integration, not
yeah.
segregation.
Okay, let me
Right.
just say, I don't know if you, okay.
Yes.
Do you want me to?
yeah, so basically I was, in your memory growing up, did you have any difficulty dealing with other populations? Do you remember any time where you were the object of anti-Semitic conversations
Not really.
or
No.
problems in
Well,
school? Or
Many of the people in our area, as I said, were Jewish. There were many non-Jewish people who, a lot of my close girlfriends were not Jewish. And some of the teachers in the junior high and high school were not Jewish. A few of them were. And when it came time for Passover, the non-Jewish friends and the non-Jewish teachers wanted me to bring matzah. They knew about it. So it was a good relationship. However, I have to say this, I did not realize it because I was at a young age. Anita would know more. But the Southern Jews did not take to nicely to the Northern Jews that came to Atlanta. In 1940, it wasn't easy, I'm sure, for my parents. Even though my father was hired I was born in Pittsburgh, and that's where a man from Atlanta came looking for a cantor. The AA in Atlanta needed a chazan. And he heard about my father and interviewed him in Pittsburgh. From what I was told, I was only 4 years old. And he got the job, and that's why we moved to Atlanta. Well, it was like Atlanta, Georgia in 1940. It was the boondocks, Do they have Jews in Atlanta? Here we go again, Jews in
Georgia.
My daughter-in-law's from Jackson, Mississippi, where my son went to marry her. There are Jews in Jackson? Yes, there are Jews. There's one Jew everywhere in the United States.
well, there are
One
like 10 Jews.
Right.
If you want to have a community.
Right. I said, so anyway, that's how we got to Atlanta. It wasn't easy for my parents. And Anita would embellish more. She would know more about that. But that's how my father came as a young man, 18, to New York. My mother was American-born, and that's where she worked for the center where the synagogue was, I think. At the
Synagogue Center.
Synagogue Center. And that's where they met.
So I'll get back to your parents when I'm talking
right,
to you, but let me ask you then about your life in Savannah. How did you become involved with the Jewish community here, having grown up in a different Jewish community? Was it easy to do? Were you too busy raising children? Were you too busy working or helping your husband? How did
Mother and father.
how did the arrangements go in terms of you seamlessly fitting into the Jewish population of
Okay,
Savannah?
I didn't have a problem. First of all, my sister was here and she paved the way, so to speak. But I became, and even though I was mother and father much of the time because my husband was on the road all the time, and although when he was home, he was very much connected with the family and with the children. But I had no problem. I started off with Hadassah and then the neighborhood women and then just the Jewish, and then the non-Jewish community. I was on committee, in the United Way, I did that. But it was mostly the Jewish community. I did not have a problem. There are people who come here at that time, today it's different, who did not have someone here to help them. And the Jewish community, the people were not very nice to those people that came here at that time. Today, it's a different story. People are able to infiltrate more readily than they did in the I came here in 1961, and so I had an advantage because I had visited here before I married my husband, so I knew my sisters, in-laws, and so on, and I knew a few people here.
So if you came in 1961, you came in the cusp of the civil rights movement.
That's right.
Did you have difficulties related to integration at that time, that in terms of your ability to also fit in?
Not really, no. The only time when my children, I had 2 sons and a daughter, and my daughter was the youngest, and the two sons were in public school. We lived on Sylvan Drive, and they went to Pulaski. They would ride their bikes. Those are the days when you didn't have to worry about your children riding at school without them being on a bus or in your car. And that's when busing started. And Savannah was one of the first cities. And we were now, and what has happened in the area of Sylvan Terrace, as soon as the integration and busing started, many of our Jewish people left Sylvan Terrace. And the neighborhood became integrated, which we did not have a problem with. And we were not one of the first people to leave the neighborhood. And then the schools, then there was you could, after third grade, I think you had to send from Pulaski, your children were going to have to be bused a mile and a half, whatever the mileage was, across the way, beyond Montgomery, west of Montgomery Street. So at that time, and then the Afro-American children were being bused over to Pulaski. Well, what had happened was the teachers at Pulaski couldn't handle what was coming over, and then the students going over to the Afro-American school, it was chaos. That was the first time that there was any issue, let me put it that way. So at that point, before my children got to the third grade, I felt like I had to change them. I was not a believer in private schools, and they went to Hancock for a few years. And then in the last 2 years of my older, Hancock went out of business after 1 year of high school. They originally went from first to pre-kindergarten to fifth grade, and it was a wonderful school. And then they started a high school, which didn't last more than 2 years because they had some internal political.
Was there a Jewish option for school?
What? Oh, there was a Savannah Hebrew Day School, yes.
Was it an option for your children?
No,
Why
I didn't.
not?
They went to because I wasn't interested. I wanted them to go to a public school. And they went to afternoon, 4 days a week, Hebrew school. They were still involved with basketball and all the sport activities. And at that time, Savannah Hebrew Day School flourished because many of the Jews, because everybody was floundering because of what was happening in the school system. So there were 250 kids at that time at the Savannah Hebrew Day School.
Wow.
Yes. And of course they did it not because they wanted the day school, they did it to escape the busing. And as time went on, they pulled their kids out and sent them to wherever.
Tell me about your relationship with the JEA and what families use the facility and the after-school Hebrew or Sunday school program that your children would have gone to.
Well, a lot of families belonged to the JEA, the whole Jewish community. I mean, everybody belonged. It was a large membership because everything centered around the JEA at this location. There was a JEA downtown before I came in. That's when my husband was growing up. But this was the JEA that was built, I guess, in the 50s. And
55.
Pardon?
55.
55. So my children we were very involved in the Jewish community here. And what was the rest of the question?
Well, I'm interested in the dynamics because different people, depending on what year they were involved in the JEA, different denominations of Jews were coming here, and some were coming and some were not. And so in terms of the Hebrew school, who filtered into that school?
Okay, there was a Bureau of Jewish Education, which was handled by Mr. Sam Rosenberg. And that encompassed the whole community, whoever wanted, it was a bureau. And it was housed here in this building. Mr. Sam Rosenberg had an office here, and there were Hebrew teachers. And my children had a wonderful Hebrew education, davened every day. I mean, it was, pretty religious. I'm talking about my sons. And it was 4 days a week, and they didn't go to Sunday school. It was Hebrew school. And when it came time for their bar mitzvahs, they had to have another teacher. And in addition to the years they went to Hebrew school, they still had to have extra tutoring or teaching before their bar mitzvah. And at that time, a Rabbi Eisenstark was the one that taught them.
Was
And
that through the conservative synagogue?
It was through the Orthodox.
Through the Orthodox synagogue.
But, and again, there were students from the conservative that went to the Bureau Hebrew School and the Orthodox. I don't think any of the Reform students went, maybe a couple of Reform went to the Bureau, because it encompassed the the whole Jewish community. It wasn't just one synagogue. And they still maintained they certainly maintained their Jewish identity, and they still were able to participate in other sports, even though they went to Hebrew school 4 days a week. So, I don't know what else.
Well, if you will permit me, let me
Okay,
talk
go
to your
ahead.
sister for a
Go
few
ahead.
minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about what you've done with your father, your parents' legacy. All right, so introduce yourself, and it's the same type of thing. I want some background about growing up Jewish in the South and the impact it had on you. And I know that you didn't start out there, and so you have other things to maybe compare it to that your sister didn't.
My name is Anita Schwartzman Odrezin Karnibad. All my names, and I'll answer to all of them. I moved here in 1955 to work for the JEA as the Children's Activities Director. But I had traveled to Savannah in many occasions for conventions, because I worked at the Southern Zionist Youth Commission office in Atlanta that encompassed 8 states. But to get back to 1940, if you will, I was 11 when Elaine was 5, and we came from integration versus walking into segregation. And it was quite a jolt, because not knowingly, I got on the streetcar to go to junior high school, and I found a seat and I sat down. The trolley stopped. The trolley conductor came to the back and he says, "You can't sit here." And I said, "Why not? Did I take someone else's seat?" And he said, "No, the blacks sit here." That was the first introduction I had to integration, because even in Pittsburgh, we were friendly with blacks, whites, Catholics, Jew. It made no difference. I had an education at that point, that there was a strict dichotomy between black and white. And skipping over that for a moment, going to the anti-Semitism, I had a teacher at Hoke Smith Junior High School who was very annoyed because I was out 6 days for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. 2, 4, 6, 7 days. And she once said to me, "You Jews just have too many holidays." I came home and told my mother, and our mother didn't mince any words at times, and she went to school to talk to the teacher very nicely, very quietly. So I did have a touch of anti-Semitism there. That was the only time I really ran into anti-Semitism. But the northern versus the southern Jew was another ballgame. I was criticized because I wore Lyle stockings, which were the things that 11-year-olds wore in Pittsburgh. And I didn't know you're supposed to just wear socks and saddle Oxfords. I didn't know about those things. And I was in Hoke Smith Junior High School. We had these long luncheon tables and a monitor at the head of the table. And I brought my lunch, of course, and I had someone hand me a nickel and said to me, "A hunky." And I turned around and I said, "What is that?" "Just pass it down, a hunky." Turned out it was an ice cream on a stick that was covered with chocolate. So I had a whole education with that. Then we had an education, I did, of the Southern accent in synagogue. When I heard, may rest in peace, Dr. Nathan Blass get up and in his strictly Southern accent, which I'm not going to imitate, of course, say one of the blessings, well, the Aliyah, when he went up for an Aliyah. And I started because it was so foreign to what we knew, not that we didn't have a northern accent of some kind, I guess, but we didn't speak Southern. When I went to work at the after I got out of college, one more thing, our father being cantor, we were raised in an Orthodox home. When it came time for me to graduate from high school, I had to go to evening school because we really couldn't afford my going away to college at that time. And the evening school was 3 nights a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I said, Daddy, what am I going to do? He says, education is very important. I had to take the streetcar. It was impossible to walk. So I took the streetcar. He said, but go there, go to class, and come right home. Because he felt that education was very important. And even though we were in an Orthodox synagogue, which was in the process, this is in Atlanta, the Havatachim, in the process of changing to conservative. And it took from 1940 to 1951 when they actually went on the books with the United Synagogue and was officially conservative. But truthfully, the services and all were becoming more and more conservative at that time. But I had the opportunity of traveling here for the Youth Commission, and that's where I met Miriam and Jack Levy, and who became very close friends of mine, and met many others who became good friends. And then when I was offered a job here, I was offered a job in Miami at the time and one in Atlanta. And I was going to take the one in Miami, and my mother was having a fit. When will we see you? We don't drive, but it's too costly to fly. So I took the job at Savannah, and that was in 1955 when this original building on Abercorn Street opened. It was that first year. I lived with Jack and Miriam for the 2 or 3 weeks until my apartment was ready. Jack wouldn't let me go until my telephone was connected, and I still didn't drive. And I lived in Abercorn Terrace, which the part that's torn down now and rebuilt with something else. That apartment is gone, the one that I was in. So I could walk here. It was no problem. But everybody in the community at that time, even ones that I didn't know, very often somebody would stick their head in the office and said, "You don't know me." Edith Silverman, by the way, is gone, may she rest in peace also. My name is Edith Silverman. You don't know me, but I want you to come to dinner Shabbat Friday night, and Ben will pick you up. I said, thank you. And I went. And they lived on the east side of town at that time. But that's how people were at that time. But most of the community at that time was the Jewish community, was a very integrated Jewish community in that their love of the old JEA down on Barnard Street that transmitted itself into the love of the new building. And the volunteerism was easy to get constantly. Whatever we did here were filled with volunteers. All the families belonged. Things have changed now, it's true, but times have changed. And as far as Savannah's a unique community in that whether you're Jewish or Catholic or Protestant or Chinese, Vietnamese, what have you, everybody, mostly, I wouldn't say everyone, but most people are very friendly to each other and very tolerant of each other.
You have opened up so many questions, but
I'm
these
sure
are
I have.
short. These are short interviews, so I'm going to try and pull a couple of things together, and then you
Okay.
respond as you want. And then I want to make sure that I ask you about Russian resettlement, and I want to ask you about your father and the legacy piece.
Yeah.
All right. So the interesting piece that keeps coming back to my mind is the fact your father, a very religious man, and representing religion for so many people, allows you, a girl, on a Friday night to ride, to be educated. Boom, 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 because so many of the conversations I'm having deal with boys being educated but not girls in traditional families, being restricted by Judaism, but as people become more assimilated, it working against Jewish identity. But in this case, it's not against Jewish identity because education is such an important part of Jewish identity that how maybe did you reconcile what you knew your parents represented and what it meant? And then I was thinking also, you came at such an amazing time, 1955, where I'm thinking it's very hard for people to release that old building to come to a new one. So what were the challenges, I mean, that you had in setting up basically a brand new building and a new
The
era?
biggest challenge, believe it or not, here was the name of the building. We were, two things, the name of the building and whether or not to be part of the Red Feather Agency, which is now United Way. It was called Red Feather at that time. There was a pro and a con. There were two groups. There was a group that wanted to change the name to Jewish Community Center, and there was the other group that said, no, this is the Jewish Educational Alliance, and that's the way it's going to stay. Now, that was in 1955. Being part of the Red Feather, or United Way today, was something that went contrary to what a lot of the people who felt that we take care of our own. And as a result, we did become part of the Red Feather and the United Way because we needed the money. We were expanding. We had a day school, not day school, the summer camp program, which that first year I was in charge of, and there were over 350 children in it, all Jewish. All Jewish. And times have changed, though. Kids go away to camp now. And this leads me in my mind, I forgot that when I taught school, I taught at the time of integration, and that was another whole story, really, of a lot of pros and cons with the integration. I never thought I would put my children in private school, but I did. And I was teaching in public school, but I had no choice. The Board of Education, as hard as they tried, made a number of mistakes. Starting integration at the 12th grade was absolutely the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of, and I said so, but I needed my job, and I was working, and I stopped for about a year to go back and get my master's, get my certification full, because, and then I interviewed the schools that I went to, rather than have them interview me. It was a two-way thing, and I wanted to be sure that the principal was fair, and I ended up in Garden City at Mercer Junior High with a principal, and he's gone now too, who was not only anti-Semitic but anti-black. And what he did, though, he had to do what he was told. He had the school set up in alphabetical order. So I had a 7th grade and 8th grade English class that was made up of either people with the last name of A or people with the last name of B. In addition to that, he had a rotating schedule, which was terrific. You taught your homeroom the first period, but the next day your homeroom left that, and you got the second period was another group. So each day you taught, each day of the week, you taught different groups at different times. And unfortunately, it was in an area in Garden City where sometimes there was a lot of dope and dope addicts, and there also were children who had to leave school to help their fathers, what they call haul, H-A-U-L, because the fathers had trucks, and when the season was where they had to haul equipment or something for somebody, the boys had to help their fathers. So I could understand that. And as it turned out, I didn't realize that the intercom system, the principal was listening to me as well as I could hear him. But he did ask me to come back, and I was glad to come back because it was an air-conditioned, self-contained school, and he was fair. Even though he had his biases, he was fair. But unfortunately, my children got caught in the pairing of schools, and that's what Elaine was talking about. And I couldn't get my son to school unless I transferred myself, because I didn't want him to cross Montgomery Street to go on the other side of the road. And I transferred myself to Beach Junior High, and used to take him to school to be with the cafeteria people. And then I'd come back, and I put myself on the bottom. Well, that was another story. When I looked at Beach Junior High School, I saw that there were not enough chairs there to house all of the children from Sylvan Terrace, that side of town, the air base. And I said to the custodian there, I said, how many chairs do you have? He said, I think he said there was something like 75 or 80, and there would be like 150 people going in there. I happen to have known personally the superintendent of schools, assistant superintendent, who was in charge of placing children, and all the Jewish boys at that time were 13 and bar mitzvah age. So I called him and I said, I know you're going to have double session. He said, yes, we will. Now, he was not Jewish, by the way. And he said, I said, he said, what do you want? I said, well, the Jewish boys are going to have to be, when the cards go out, telling them what time to go, they're going to have to be in the bottom session. He said, I can't do that. And I said, what do you mean you can't do it? He says, well, you can't ask for special privileges. And I got really angry with him, and I said, look, we're not asking for Jewish studies like the Afro-Americans, who were called blacks at that time, are asking for black studies at the school. I said, we have our own Hebrew school in the afternoon. There is a parochial school, day school, that's taught by the teachers who teach the afternoon Hebrew school. And the only time our boys who go to public school can go to Hebrew is in the afternoon. And if you put them in the afternoon session, they'll miss Hebrew. He said, I can't do anything. I said, well, we'll see about that. So I went and I called Rabbi Rosenberg, who got on the right horn, and the next thing we knew, all the Jewish boys and Jewish girls were put in the bottom session. Because they had to, otherwise how would they have had Hebrew?
I love the story, and it's going to lead me to the last series of questions, which has to do with leadership, ways in which who we are as Jews impact our lives in Savannah, and that's a perfect example, and things that we do for ourselves but also for others. And I wanted to talk about Russian resettlement, and so I'm going to switch and bring it back here. And I know we are running over a little bit, but okay, but I definitely I'll push back a few minutes so we can finish.
Something with you. When my husband, came over with he was 6 months old when he came over with his parents in 1922, when my in-laws emigrated from Poland, and they spoke no English. Of course, Sam was 6 months old; he was the baby, but. They had a store on Farm Street. They lived upstairs over the store. Sam grew up here, had everybody, and they, as I said, they lived on Farm Street. And he told me himself, and I just reflected on this with someone in the community, she'll be nameless, about 2 years ago. And there are people that are here now who did not grow up here, who really don't know the background of the Jewish community back in the 1920s and so on. They all lived downtown, blacks, Irish, all the ethnic religions. They were all friendly. And I hear the story very often from a family member who's still here, still around. A lot of the family's gone now. That when my in-laws went to call Sam to come in from playing, that they would call him by his Yiddish name, Zalman. Well, the blacks would come in to buy from the store, and they'd say, "Where's Zalman?" The non-Jews would come in and say. So the point I'm making is, it was a very cohesive, ethnic, intercultural community. Today, it's different. Which time marches on, and there are some people that have been here about 30 years that don't know the background, the Jewish history of Savannah, and of course now, with the way the Jewish Center is now, and we do have a lot of non-Jews belonging, and the preschool and so on, which is what is happening all over the country. I'm not saying it's right, but it's what's evolved in today's time. And when I first moved here, when I got married, the JEA was one fee. There was the health club. It wasn't called, nobody knew the word fitness center in 1962 or 3. And that was a separate membership, at which time many non-Jews, men, belonged to the health club. So there has been a knowledge of the Jewish Center being integrated with non-Jews, but it was different. So here we are today, and there's this whatever going on, has been, and I don't want to get into the politics, but as I said, people that have been here 20 or 30 years that did not grow up here don't really know Savannah Jewish history from way back. And you can't go back. But you do learn and you do mature from the history that you grew up with. And this is a problem that I think faces many of the newer people that have come to this community, whether it's 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or whatever. And I'm sure the same thing's happening in Atlanta. Atlanta's tremendous. I mean, many of the Jews there do not even identify themselves as Jews. They don't even give to all the Jewish organizations. It's a different story in Savannah. And
Well, tell me about the leadership role you took in
Okay.
the Russian community.
okay, in the Russian, the second
And what
wave-
that story, and exactly what this, why were they coming here?
First of all, we came from a family of leadership. My father, who came over as a young cantor, was active in New York, in the Bronx. Was that in the Bronx? And my
Mommy was.
And my mother was too. And then we moved to Atlanta, and of course his position as cantor was another situation. My mother was active as much with the PTA, with bonds for, helping. Well, it was after the war, in 1945, when the immigrants came from the Holocaust. And I can remember and it was called the Jewish Welfare Fund then.
The New Americans.
The New Americans. And in fact, across the hall from us in our 4-unit apartment came a family from the Holocaust, a husband and wife, and the wife's brother. And I mean, my mother would speak Yiddish to them, and so on and so forth. So we grew up with leadership. And you want to know about my connection with Russia? Okay, the first wave of Russian resettlement, I helped out as a volunteer, and that was, I forgot what year already.
Tell me why
70.
they were coming and what
Why
the
they were,
situation was.
okay, it's when they were being persecuted, they were sent, Gorbachev was the man in charge at that time. The president. And the Russian Jews were trying to escape persecution. And so the first wave of people came. The second wave of people were in the late 80s. And they were sent to internment camps. And at that time, in different parts of Europe. And at that time, finally, Gorbachev opened the gates. And the immigrants were pouring out. And at that time, they were only going to use the larger cities to resettle Soviet Jews. New York, Chicago, San Francisco, whatever. Well, when he opened the gates, and there were so many more coming out, they had to come to the smaller cities. They never thought they would ask Savannah, Georgia to take you. Were too small. And at that time, we had, Stan Ramadi was our director, and we had a half of a social worker. We had really no professional help. And we were told we only were going to need we were going to get 4 families. And this was in the end of '89. So the first family was due to arrive in January. So we started getting our volunteers together, and we learned from the first wave of Russian resettlement the things that we didn't do. And I had just come back from a Federation convention in Cincinnati, and came back with all this material, and at that time they made me chairman because I came back with all this material. And at that time we had a wonderful volunteer community, and we had committees set up, and what was the food committee, the job committee, the English second language, I mean, we really, and we had non-Jews come forth to try to help, not just Jews. And what was supposed to be 4 families ended up being a lot more. And we were really scurrying around trying to get apartments, homes, this, that, whatever. Not homes, but apartments. And that was one of the Lamar apartments, which is now Candler. And I think Abercorn Terrace was here.
Yeah.
And they had just built an extension, which is now it's now SCAD, behind Red and White. So we really floundered. We had I can't even begin to tell you, it was wonderful. And then we had serious problems because the Russian Jews were coming, and we had all these volunteers lined up to pick. Everybody came 1 o'clock in the morning with their whole life with them. And they were coming off planes with crosses. And people were calling me, I thought we were resettling Jews. And Marcia Steinfeld Darrens was our worker. because whoever we had as half a worker did not work out. And Stan Ramadi was the director. And for hours we would sit here, and people would call, and we got on the phone, called Jewish Agency. Well, who are you sending? Non-Jews with the crosses. Our people here are having a fit. They're picking up people, and they're calling me, and what am I going to tell them? Well, we got an education with this. These people, the husband was Jewish, the wife was not. The wife was Jewish, the husband was not. So we had to learn about this. I mean, they had no religion for 70 years. There was a lot of intermarriage. So we had to get over that hurdle, and we did. And we got them jobs, and people were creating jobs here. And then we had trouble with a lot of the Russians that came in. And we put up with it. A lot of the communities would not. And it was an enlightening, eye-opener experience. And we had some good stories, too. But I don't know what else you want me to tell you.
We did it all.
We found the houses. We subsidized them until they could get on their own. But we didn't have the job market to really employ people. But people were manufacturing jobs. David Rosenzweig hired 2 people to sweep the floor. He didn't really need it. I mean, this is the kind of Jewish community we had. Ricky Eichholz had the beauty supply. He hired people to take the little bottles and put them in case. I mean, he didn't really. They created jobs. That's the kind of community Savannah was, and hopefully, well, it's different now. It's still good, but it's a different time.
All right, I'm going to pull back. I'm going to get the two of you together. You'll have to sit just a little bit closer so I can kind of.
This old lady can't move too easily.
So we've talked about leadership. Both of you have really talked to that issue because you've done so many things, and I didn't even ask you the mundane stuff. You've done above and beyond in terms of leadership and having a sense of the community and being involved, even grassroots, basic leaders of programs, and then
both our husbands came from the grassroots of Savannah.
So I mean, you can talk a little bit about that, but I also want you to talk about passing on traditions. And how do you interpret that? How did you interpret it for your children? What did they get from their fathers in terms of, how did they know they were Jewish? And then what did you do, a step above what most other people have done, to make sure that, what did you do to create a legacy for your family, for your father?
Well,
So talk to all of that. Go. You got 7 more minutes.
Well, it's more than just a legacy from our father, because there's a legacy from our husbands, and both my husbands and Elaine's husband came from the grassroots here. So there's that legacy.
So talk about that first.
All right. Well, my first husband was active in the Philharmonic. In the symphony. He played. That was a hobby. He didn't live long enough to really do much else, but my second husband, Nathan, was very active with Bonds of Israel and anything that had to do with United Way, and was help anybody that needed. If you had a phone call and they said so-and-so, or we need $100 or $200 to help someone out, he would just write the check and give it to them. He was able to at that time. Anyhow, so that's why I said we moved from the grassroots, but what was the other part of the question you wanted to answer?
How this turns into a legacy of traditions. How do you teach that to your children? What did they see? What did they know?
Well, they saw that what she did.
Well, they saw that we had a Jewish home. Mezuzahs on the door, Jewish memorabilia, that whatever it was that we could afford. Books, observance of the holidays. When the time came for when VCRs came out and videos, camcorders came out, we would take videos of the Passover. We'd all be together Friday nights when we were able to be together.
Did they learn from your leadership in the community?
Well,
they
learned from that too, and not only that, when I was teaching, I used to take them with me. When my daughter said, I want to go with you, because at one point I worked for the EOA, and before I was teaching, and because that was a part-time job. And she said, I want to go with you. So she went with me when I made house visits of what we were doing, what the EOA was doing at that time. Actually, I guess it's what they observed us do.
Mhm.
I mean, holidays were meaningful, and they didn't go to school on a holiday when some of their friends did, and but that eventually, changed as they got older because they had to go to school, but they didn't until they got into college. And I don't know whether you had a different experience. Elaine's children are younger than mine, but I see that in my children, my two children, my two biological children, my daughter did what she could for her children together with her husband at that time, and bar mitzvahs and holidays also. Of course, most of it was with the family. And my son has been active in the temple in Raleigh, and all of his children have been bar mitzvah, and they're all birthright Israel, except for the youngest one is only 16. And they have seen by what they were doing. And I can't say that, I know that my son married into a Reform family where there was no observance of anything in particular other than maybe Passover or Rosh Hashanah on a limited basis, but no candle lighting for Shabbos or anything like that. But their children have carried on the tradition of Judaism in their way, and it's a good way. And it's pleasant to me when I go up there now that I'm a widow again. I go up there for Rosh Hashanah or for Yom Kippur to be with them, and I enjoy the services. But as far as the other legacy, and I know what you're getting at, our father's music. There was a member of the congregation who, as a hobby, made at that time, and I'm going back 60 years.
In Atlanta.
Oh, thank you, in Atlanta, reel-to-reel tapes, and he did it as a hobby. So he did the reel-to-reel tape of a rehearsal of the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur music that our father was singing together with the choir, rehearsing with the choir. And then he also did an entire slichot service with, because that you could do. It was not. He wouldn't do anything on a Sabbath or a holiday, but slichot was midnight. That's when they did the midnight service in Atlanta, and it was the entire service for 1 hour, which was absolutely with the rabbi and president of the synagogue, and sister, and so forth and so on, and the choir. In addition to that, there was a choir leader, non-Jewish, I can't remember the name of the church, who came to our father and said he wanted him to do the Kol Nidra on a recording that he was making called Songs of Faith. And of course, our father said yes. So what happened is, years later, I have that recording, but years later I took the reel-to-reel tapes, and one of our friends, Herbie Lipsitz, may he rest in peace, he's not here with us any longer, was a hobby of his, and he had the equipment. And he made the reel-to-reel tapes into audio cassettes. When CDs came along, I took the audio cassettes and I had them put onto CDs. And then a friend of mine sent me an email with some music, Jewish music. We both loved Jewish music. And I see it came from the Florida Atlantic State University Judaica Music Archives Department in Boca Raton, Florida. And it was about a year after that I said, you know what? I want to put Daddy's music on there. So we called Mr. Ben Roth down in Florida, and I told him what I had, and he told me to time it. And it took me 6 or 7 months. I got it all together and sent it down to him, and lo and behold, it's on the website. Cantor Joseph Schwartzman, with his little biography there and with his music. And what I did too is I extrapolated from the music of my first wedding to David O'Dresen of the Sheva Brachas, which were really beautiful. Our father decided he wanted to lead the music that day of my wedding, and my mother said, no, you're the father of the bride. So Estelle Karp, who was really a professional singer, was a soloist, and she led the choir at that time. But the Sheva Brachas were gorgeous. So I had it extrapolated and put onto that for the website. And then I came across what I thought was a movie, and it turned out it was the Ashrei, which I found out afterward is the prayer that's said almost before every service. So that's all on there. I have since found another one. I can't put it on there. But I thought it was an instructional recording that our father did with children who were learning the bar mitzvah. At that time, confirmation was 10th grade, and this was a conservative synagogue, and it was Shavuos, the second day of Shavuos. So I thought it was an instructional record, but when I listened to it and had Rabbi Barkin come over and listen too, he said, it's the 13 articles of faith. Plus, it's also the bracha for the 30th day of the Omer, and the day that he came to listen to it was the 30th day of the Omer. So I have that now on CD. Elaine has a copy. I guess that went to my sister, Sylvia and Macon. And, well, I'm going to learn how to burn them now, so I can do my own burning. At $15 a piece, they get a little much. I have quite a few people I want to send it to, because I couldn't possibly, I didn't even try to get it on the website to add to it. I don't think he could do that. I don't know, I have to ask.
So it's now on the, all that she was talking about is on the website.
Except for the 13 articles
Well,
of
except
faith,
for that. And so anybody can log into it.
Anybody
and
can go
listen
in,
to
they
the
can
music.
They can listen to it. And the music is the music that you don't hear today as much. When I go into the synagogue here and listen to the cantor that might come in as a visitor, doesn't make any difference which synagogue, because the melodies are different. I know the words, but I can't somehow get with the melody. These are the old traditional melodies that came from, our father was not a composer of music. He arranged it for the voices that he had to work with. And he used the music mainly of Lewandowski and of Zabel Zilberts. And these were composers of cantorials. Of music, and a little later on, some of the cantors in the Reformed temples have started to use. This was in maybe the 1950s. Max Helfman, who came along, and there are others now. Charles Davidson in Pittsburgh, Chuck. I mean, they all have written music. That's the legacy that we've passed on to our children.
Okay,
Wonderful.
my children were raised in the Orthodox synagogue. My two sons, my older son really davens beautifully. And Michael can daven too. My older son's not married. And he had leadership, abilities in his time. Michael is married to a girl who was Reformed. They belong to Temple Sinai Reform, which is a wonderful, I've been to many of their services in Atlanta. And he's been a leader in his community. To his children, my 3 granddaughters have all been leaders, and all bat mitzvahed, and have had a good Jewish background. And my grandson in Cincinnati, who is the son of my deceased daughter, has, I don't know, he has a pretty good Jewish background, but my daughter was really a leader here in Savannah. BBYO, she was Nicaea of Dixie Council, and she really was a leader when she moved and married a Cincinnati young man. And she was the head of Hadassah there and other Jewish organization, and she was quite a leader. So we passed on, and my husband was away a lot, but when he was home, he was a big force in going to and my father-in-law. My older son used to go to shul every Saturday with my father-in-law. At the time, Richard was like 5 years old, and he would always go with Papa and he more so than my second son. And I'll never forget, one time we went downtown for lunch, and at that time it was Anton's on Broughton Street, where the new restaurant is now, that's owned by Ellie. That was Anton's, which was owned by Greeks. And Richard would go with my husband, not my father-in-law, and get whatever. And Tito, remember Tito?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Managed Anton's. And he would talk to Richard, and he'd say, "Oh, you look so nice, you have a nice pants." He said, "These are my shul clothes." and so Tito, who was not Jewish, would always say, "Do you have your shul clothes?" So the kids really had a good Jewish education. And hopefully not everybody's going to follow through with what we would like them to, and we do the best we can.
Well, I'd
All
like to
right,
add just
parting
one-
sentence.
I just want to add one more thing, which I didn't mean to overlook. Susan was my daughter Susan was very active in both Hadassah and in Federation. She headed the Federation drive, and she was one of the few people from here. There are some others, too, who won the Young Leadership Award in wherever the Federation convention was at the time. And she has since been as active as she can possibly be.
Thank you, ladies.
Okay,